Russian drones attacks have struck several parts of Ukraine overnight, including residential buildings in the southern region of Kherson. Now, this comes as crews are still clearing debris from drone and missile attacks that battered the capital Kyiv in the biggest aerial bombardment since the start of the war. In his nightly video address, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said he and US President Donald Trump had agreed to work on increasing Kyiv's air defenses. On Friday, Trump spoke to reporters on Air Force One about Ukraine, including the potential of sending more Patriot missile systems.
Well, they need them for defense. I mean, I don't want to see people killed, and they're going to need them for defense. They're amazingly effective. You know, we knocked out 14 out of 14. That's pretty amazing. If you think of it, it's almost incredible. But we knocked out 14 out of 14, so they're going to need something because they're being hit pretty hard.
Frank Ledwidge is a former UK military intelligence officer and current senior lecturer in strategic studies at Portsmouth University, and he joins us from Oxford. Good to have you with us. So Donald Trump says more Patriots might go to Ukraine. How much of a difference would that make?
Well, good morning, Monica. I think it's quite important that we don't get fixated on this Patriots issue. Patriots are useful, particularly the kind that the Ukrainians have, the so-called PAC-3. They're useful for exactly the sort of target that President Trump was talking about, which is to say very difficult interceptions of ballistic missiles and, in the Russian case, hypersonic missiles. The problem is actually much wider than that. It's and indeed deeper. And it goes to the problems faced by all Western powers as to how do we, two problems really. First of all, where do we get the ammunition that we don't have for our anti-aircraft systems? And secondly, equally or indeed more importantly, are the increasing size and nature of Russian drone attacks. Now, as you said, there was said there, Monica, on the report, this was the other night, the night of the 3rd of July, was the largest attack so far with over 500 attempts at strikes. Now, the good news is that the Ukrainians dealt with most of those. Of course, they didn't deal with all of them, and the interception rate is reducing. So the problem is wider than Patriots. It's a problem faced by all Western powers, and it's essentially a problem of cost. You can't strike $20,000, $50,000 missile with a $4 million Patriot, or for that matter, a $500,000 IRIS-T or a $300,000 or euro AMRAAM. It just doesn't work out in an attritional sense in the long run. That way lies a path. That's a path to failure.
And why, Frank, is Russia ramping up drone and missile strikes now? Could this be the start of a bigger Russian push?
The answer is yes, it is the start from the air perspective of a bigger Russian push. We're going to see this happen again and again. Over the month of June, I think the average big strike, and of course there are strikes every night, as we saw last night all over the country, but the big strikes usually on big cities, Kyiv, sometimes Lviv, occasionally others, the big strikes now comprise 500 or so drones, most of which get stopped by electronic countermeasures or indeed other forms of air defences, aircraft, and sometimes even interceptor drones. But we're going to see, unfortunately, that number increase and the regularity increase. And so what Russia's going to be doing over the next few months is ramp up the supply of these, particularly these Shahid drones, as we used to call them, Gerans now, to about 1,000 a week, according to analysts. So we're going to be seeing much bigger attacks, and therefore the Ukrainians are going to have to be looking at and are looking at other forms of air defense. The trouble is, like interceptor drones, as I mentioned, also things like directed energy weapons a bit far away. But unfortunately, they're not on the table right now. And the systems the Ukrainians have are not sufficient just yet to deal with the kind of volume we're going to be looking at over the next few months. And we're looking at here between 500 and sometimes maybe even 1,000 each strike. Not every night, but each strike. And that would be very, very an extremely formidable challenge.
Oh. All right. Frank Ledwidge, former UK military intelligence officer, they're joining us from Oxford. Frank, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Monica.
And Russian forces are closing in on Ukraine's Sumy region near Russia's border. Ukraine is trying to hold them back. Defense lines are being strengthened as tens of thousands of Russian troops advance towards the strategic city.
anti-tank ditches, barbed wire and concrete barriers. Ukrainian forces are building defensive lines quickly to prevent an attack by Russian forces. Kyiv says Russia, which invaded Ukraine more than 3 years ago, has now amassed 50,000 troops with the goal of advancing deeper into the Sumy region. The soldiers are building several trenches on the front lines.
The interior is lined with noise insulation because when firing there is a heavy load on our auditory system. So noise reduction was devised. Plus, it's fireproof so it doesn't burn. 3 soldiers can easily defend themselves here. As you can see, the thickness is sufficient. And on the outside, it is also equipped with gabions.
The Ukrainian military says anti-drone corridors, often comprising physical barriers like netting, are needed to protect Ukrainian troops and logistics routes. They say they need to increase the speed at which the work is being carried out. The first mission is to ensure the safety of Ukrainian soldiers fighting on the front lines.
And we're doing our utmost, first of all, to cover all sections of the trenches with a layer of soil. And secondly, we're digging deeper so that the enemy cannot see us from the surface and cannot tell that this is a defensive position.
Russian President Volodymyr Putin has said his military could try to capture Sumy city, the regional capital some 30 kilometers from the border. Reports suggest that Russian troops are steadily advancing across the sprawling front line in Ukraine, and Ukrainians are preparing to ensure the advancements are stopped.